Here's a story on how being held to a certain bit of criteria for a partner, looks, money, and all of that good stuff can lead you to your own detriment. This is an Affrilachian folk tale called Sistah, Sara May. Sister Sara May was the prettiest young girl in all the countryside. Despite that, she didn't intend to stay there forever. She was the only child of the wealthiest family in the countryside who gave her everything that she ever wanted: dresses, fancy shoes, a lesson in manners, everything that a girl could ever want. But Sara May wanted to get away from her folks, who nicknamed her Sister. She wanted to get away from her family's rich farm life in the countryside and move away to the big city. She wanted to try something new. Every day, a young man from the farm, just on the other side of their own, would stop by and try to find a reason to make conversation with Sara May. There she'd be, just sitting on her front porch or in the family parlor, and she often smelled like rose and lilac. She would also pinch her cheeks and bite her lip to make them appear pink. Sara May would just stare down the road and dream of a life in the big city. When the young man would try to talk to her, though, she'd just turn up her nose and ignore him. One day, as Sara May was sitting on her porch, she saw another young man, very handsome and dressed impeccably well, walking down the road. It's as if he was gliding right towards her. So she bit her lip and pinched her cheeks to make them just a tad bit pink. She fixed the buckle on her red velvet shoes and awaited the young man to come to her door to ask to court her. But he never did. In fact, when he got to the turn in the road, he went right on into the woods. She couldn't believe that she'd just been ignored. She ran down the porch steps and just stared at the young man, but he still ignored her. His back looked as good as his front, and even though he was walking away from her, his perfectly dressed self just moved like the wind. "Excuse me," said Sara May, calling to the young man. "Folks around here call me Sister." But he kept walking. He didn't even pay her any attention. "I live in the big house back there, right by the crossroads. Would you like to come back and sit on the porch with me? Maybe have a cool drink?" The young man seemed to take absolutely no notice of her, causing her to get even more frustrated. "Apparently, you don't know who I am. My father has the biggest farmland in 3 counties. Lots of young men consider me to be a catch. They love to make me their wife, too. Now, wouldn't you like to come over and have a conversation with me?" The young man never turned his head. He just kept walking. But he did reply back, while never turning around to look at her. "Young woman, it would do you well to never follow me." But he looks too dang good for Sister not to say anything. "You can call me Sister," she replies back. "Everybody around here calls me that." He chatted on, following behind them as they approached the woods. Then the young man's arms fell off. Sara May looked at his arms on the ground and she wasn't exactly sure what to say. Excuse me, I don't want to alarm you, but your arms just fell off," she said. The young man just kept moving and simply replied, "I have no need for arms." And sister, you would do well not to follow me. But even without his arms, this young man looked way too good for Sister to resist. So Sara May kept following him, trying to start a conversation. Then one of the young man's legs fell off. Sara May, taking those lessons in manners very well, tried to be polite and she said, "Excuse me, sir, your leg just fell off." But the young man just kept moving and said, "I have no need for legs. And sister, you would do well not to follow me." But even with no arms and one leg, he still looked too good for Sara May to resist. So she kept following him. The sun seemed to disappear as the two made their way into the woods. Things were quiet there, except for the sound of the birds and the bugs, and of course, Sister Sara May just chattering away. Then they reached a place where the shadows were almost as dark as the evening shade. Under a big black walnut tree, the man turned to Sara May. He shrugged, slid out of that one shoe, and his clothes fell to the ground. He shrugged again, and his mask with the perfect hair fell from his face. "I told you not to follow me. I have no need for arms or legs. I have no need for a mate. I came in search of a meal. He rose above Sister Sara, staring at her with his golden eyes. It was the biggest snake she had ever seen. That big snake opened up his mouth and started slurping Sister Sara down. And he fell to the ground, his belly still digesting her. You could hear her muffled cries inside his belly and see remnants of those perfect red velvet shoes still kicking out of his mouth. Well, it just so happened that the young farmer next door was getting some firewood for his ma and pa when he heard her muffled cries. He dropped his firewood and ran in the direction. That's when he saw something moving that looked like a log, but it was entirely too big. Sister Sarah May, is that you? He says. Help me, get me out, she cried. Well, he grabbed her by those red velvet shoes and pulled and pulled and pulled until she popped out of that snake's mouth. No one had ever stolen a meal right out of his mouth before. Well, that big snake slithered off and disappeared. Save my life, Sister May cried out. Would you like to come home with me and do a little courting, she says. No, thank you, says the young farmer. You don't look the way you used to. You definitely don't smell the way you used to either. And there's something else. While you were too busy turning your nose up at me, there was a young woman at the farm on the other side of us who invited me over, so I started courting her instead. So, I don't want to marry you anymore, but I will take you home if you walk 6 feet behind me because you stink. Well, you think after that that Sister Sarah May would have changed her ways, but absolutely not. Nope, the next day she was right back in that window, finely dressed, waiting for someone to come by and court her. And unless she passed away, she's still sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting.